Of the contrary, no.
No!
I think the noes have it, the noes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Hunting Trophies Import Prohibition Bill, second reading.
John Spellar.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And often in debates that have had a long genesis and been considered many times in the House, there's that hackneyed phrase that everything that needs to have been said has been said, but not everyone has said it. One can't even use that now, because everyone has said what they need to say at many times over. That is not true, of course, therefore, in this case. Not least because of the bill moved very ably and pioneered very ably by the Honourable Member for Crawley in the last session of Parliament, where there was a clear and overwhelming view of this House that this legislation should go forward. And we all know that that was subject to extended delays, and one was not wished to cast aspirations, but one could almost suggest delaying tactics in the other House. And eventually, of course, time ran out. And I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in this regard, even if in no other, I do actually welcome the postponement of the general election until the autumn, which I hope will then give us more than adequate time, not only for this bill to make its stages in this House, but also to ensure that the majority in the other place are not frustrated by a few of those who take a different view on this bill. And in some ways, it is slightly reminiscent of what's happening down there of the debate on the House of Lords in the early part of the last century, when they divided very much between the hedgers and the ditchers, of those who accepted that some reform was necessary, and therefore they were going to hedge their bets and allow reform to take place, and those who were going to die in the ditch. And I hope very much that the hedgers triumph in the other House as well, in order that this very important matter, not just to us, but also to the public, makes progress. I give way to the Right Honourable Lady.
Well, Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. It was about this time a year ago at report stage we reached this somewhat a compromised consensus to have a bill that left this place to go to the Lords. I'm right in thinking that the Right Honourable Gentleman has reintroduced that exact same bill where this House reached consensus last year, and also it technically doesn't stop hunting. However, for those animals protected by CITES, it just simply stops the import of any of those animals into this country.
The Right Honourable Lady for those comments, and also thank her for the work that she undertook as the Secretary of State in support of this of this legislation, and also to draw attention to other members of the House that because we wish to speed this the progress of this legislation, I would hope that colleagues would not be prone to making long speeches on this issue. Indeed, possibly not even medium or short speeches on this issue. But to stress that, subject to the chair, I intend to be very generous with my taking of interventions, because I think that honourable and right honourable members want to ensure that the very strong feelings of their constituents, which every time this comes up are made very clear to us, are actually expressed in this House, so they know that Parliament is listening and Parliament is undertaking their course. I will just finish with my comments to the Right Honourable Member for somewhere in Suffolk before I take the intervention from my honourable friend from Bebington, because she is absolutely right. In the last Parliament, in committee, there were concessions and discussions and a consensus brought about, which expressed very solidly. That's why I stressed that this was the overwhelming view, the overwhelming message from this House to the other House. It is very regrettable that they chose to ignore that. I understand that the other House has a role in revising legislation, and particularly when there are very deep divisions in this House. That is not the case with this particular provision of legislation. It is absolutely clear that the overwhelming majority, and indeed the overwhelming majority of our constituents in many polls, 86% or so, I'll come back to that a bit later, are in support of this legislation. And the Honourable Member for Crawley skillfully put that together, and which shows the bipartisan nature of this, and therefore that's why this measure should go through today, but also why it should be speeded through its processes in both Houses of Parliament. Now, give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful for him giving way. I'll just point out that the Bebington element of the Ellesmere constituency left about 40 years ago. I know he's been here a very long time, so it probably was correct when he first entered this place. I was actually going to intervene and make the point that he's just made, that actually there is overwhelming public support for this. Certainly I've had a number of constituents contact me to express their support, and as he has said, surveys show time and again huge public demand for this. So I think I would just ask him, does he agree with me that it is important that we make sure today we get this through as swiftly as possible, and that the other place are able to do as much as they can as quickly as they can?
Can I thank my old friend? I make no apologies for being regularly re-elected to this place over a number of decades, and I'm sure that he speaks then very effectively for his constituents in Ellesmere Port, and I suspect actually the residents in Bebington probably hold similar views as well. And that's also important, because what it shows, sometimes we have issues here before this House which maybe reflect views from certain parts of the country. And there are often arguments that maybe the arguments reflect views of those in the metropolis, or the inner metropolis, the metropolitan elite. This is an issue that runs across parties, across classes, across regions. This is a universal view across the country, that they want this country to have no part in this vile trade.
I thank him for giving way, and he makes a really important point. Like many honourable members, I've received hundreds of emails from my constituents in Batley and Spen who are appalled at the vile trade of trophy hunting. Would you agree with me that the bill will not only prevent the importation of hunting trophies to the UK, but it will also send a really powerful message to countries around the world that hunting and killing endangered animals for trophies is always unacceptable, and much more must be done to prevent this atrocious act wherever it occurs?
Yeah. Can I thank my honourable friend for that contribution, and also for the work that I know she's been undertaking on this issue, quite apart from this particular bill. But of course she's absolutely right, and other countries have already shown the way. Australia, France, Belgium, others are, and I think there's a couple of others. They have already shown the way by banning the trade in hunting trophies, and I hope that will then, what we decide here, will start to send a message to other countries that this is a international movement. And look, we always realise society evolves and opinions evolve. In this country, we have in Birmingham the bull ring. We no longer torment bulls in a public arena with dogs, or bear baiting, or cockfighting, or dog. We have moved on from that, and this is the message from this. We need to move on from this, not least, of course, because of the decline in species. And some of the arguments, and I'll touch on this again, relate very much to Africa. But I would remind colleagues, and I pay tribute, for example, to the campaign by the Daily Express on this, that other regions of the world are involved as well. Polar bears in Canada, for example, and this, I think, again demonstrates that the public really do not want these magnificent creatures to just be slaughtered, not only for a bizarre form of pleasure, but to decorate people's houses. They don't understand. Now, give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I congratulate him on bringing this bill forward. But isn't it the case that this legislation is actually supported by many of those campaigners in countries like Africa who love their animals and recognise that there's much more to be gained and it's much more profitable to keep those animals alive rather than to allow this barbaric practice.
I thank my honourable friend, and she's clearly speaking on behalf of her constituents in Nottingham, expressing those very strong views. And in a number of programmes yesterday, I pointed out that actually, for the long-term sustainable future of tourism in these countries, actually it is much better to have tourists who are shooting animals with cameras rather than with rifles, and crossbows, looking towards a future of sustainable species, and therefore people being able to enjoy, not just through historic videos from David Attenborough, but actually to enjoy going there themselves. That, of course, gives rise to a great industry and a long-term industry in the country. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Gentlemen, I agree with everything he's saying and pay tribute, as well as to my Sussex colleague for having persevered with this for so long. We shouldn't be here. This should have gone through. So can I make him a practical offer, because I've been struck by the number of emails I've had from my constituents about how important it is. Practical offer to members of the House of Lords who are minded to try and sabotage this bill again. And I speak as chairman of the all-party parliamentary group for photography. We will have a special category in the exhibition this year for wildlife photos, so they can show how brave and manly they are by getting up close with cameras rather than guns. Is that a deal?
Well, I'm not sure their knees would take it, but that's a further matter. I absolutely take the point that the honourable gentleman makes, and I think that that is right. That expanding the scope of people to be able to show their skill in photography, but also to show these magnificent creatures in their natural environment, and they will have a record of that. That's the record that they should have, not some grisly trophy on the wall. So I fully understand that, but he's absolutely right. And I'm very pleased he did raise the question about colleagues being here today, because I realise where we are in the electoral cycle. I realise that we have elections everywhere across England and Wales in this in May, and therefore many colleagues would want to be out campaigning. I thank colleagues who are here today, and that's why I hope that they will be able to participate in order to put the views of their constituents, and I hope the constituents understand the effort that has to be made in order to be here sometimes on a Friday with constituency pressure. I give way to the right honourable lady.
I'm really grateful to the honourable member for giving way. I think it was the really sort of distressing case of the killing of Cecil the lion that alerted many people to what's happening. And I want to put on record that I too have many constituents in Chipping Barnet who want this bill to go through, which is why I'm here today to support it.
And I thank the right honourable lady for coming in today, particularly as there's even more important elections taking place in her part of the country, and ones on which she and I might take a slightly different view, but we are united on this issue today. And it is very important that once again we stress the cross-party support for this important measure. I earlier highlighted the role of the honourable member for Crawley, but also I'd like to pay tribute to many of those who played a part in keeping this campaign going over many years. Yeah. I think of my old friend Bob Blizzard, previous member for Waveney, a comrade there in the Labour government whip's office back in the days of the before the 2010 election. A great friend, but also a great enthusiast for jazz, but also very much for this cause. And he encouraged me after he'd gone from Parliament to take up this issue. And his involvement in the campaign to ban trophy hunting was enormously important. Along with the current director, Eduardo Gonçalves, who is sadly not well, but I hope will be cheered by the progress of this bill later on today, and along with a number of celebrities, and most notably Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who has been a stalwart in the campaign, Dr. Jane Evans, and Peter Egan, whose name appears on the petition, the instigator of the petition that I will be referencing a bit later in the campaign. But I also want to give away to my honourable friend.
Thank you. In the other House, Lord Mancroft said, what the government are doing today is passing socialist legislation, which is an odd thing for a Conservative government to be doing. Would you agree with me? It isn't socialist legislation, it isn't Conservative legislation, it isn't Liberal Democrat legislation, Scottish National Party legislation, Plaid Cymru legislation. It's humane and compassionate legislation.
Well, we are a broad church, and if the members on the government benches wish to join the cause of socialism, I think that he is absolutely right. There are issues that sometimes divide us on non-political grounds, where people from different parties line up in different camps. Many of those are subjects of free votes. This is an issue that unites us, and also unites us with the British people. It should have been done ages ago. Should have been sorted out. It's really a shame that we're having to be here today. I don't in any way resent it, but I do, because I think it's the right thing to be doing. But it should already be on the statute, shouldn't it? Of course.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way, and also pay tribute to my honourable friend from Crawley. Today feels a little bit like deja vu. We are back again, but what I think this does is send a message to our friends in the Lords that we won't give up on this. It's the right thing to do. It's an absolute abhorrent act to go to another country to kill an endangered species, to stick their heads on one's wall. Just seems like something out of a totally different century. And I think the fact that we're here back again, fighting for the right cause and standing on the shoulders of the giants of those who've gone before on this is an important message to both the House of Lords but also to the country.
Honourable member for expressing that so well, and particularly the point he made that this is something from a previous century, and its time has passed. Society, life moves on, society moves on. And in the way that I described, and it's interesting, none of the commentators came back to me in the interviews I was doing. I said, how can you defend someone who wants to travel a distance to go and shoot a giraffe, to stand on its corpse, and then to bring parts back to this country? Nobody seems to be able to answer that question. I'm not saying it was ever right. What I'm saying is it is absolutely clear now that the public in this country are certain they don't want any part of it. Yes.
Harry McCarthy.
I think my right honourable friend makes a really valid point, because there have been some arguments put in favour of trophy hunting that say that it lends itself, to supporting conservation in the countries, which seems to me an entirely spurious argument. We've just seen some really promising figures about tiger numbers. There's now 5,574 in the wild, which is actually tiny. There should be many, many thousands more. But that shows that conservation efforts can pay off if we focus on those species. And what this is really about, it's not about conservation. As the right honourable member said, it is about shooting animals, taking pictures themselves, parading around their corpses, and then cutting their heads off to take home. And it's an abhorrent act.
Yeah. I absolutely agree, and my honourable friend has been campaigning on this, not just in Bristol, but here in Parliament for many years. Again, from the days when we were working in the Whip's office, and makes a very strong point. The argument about, well, we're killing these animals in order to save them, is that, we're creating a desert and called it peace. And I really do not buy into that, and equally importantly, nor do the British public. I give way to the right honourable member.
There has been in the past, when we've debated this, there has been this argument about this is performing a role of culling for protected species. we've always been able to negate that argument, because there are times when there is a strategy for culling certain species, but that's done on the basis of scientific fact rather than inhumane delight at the killing of the animals.
My friend makes a very important point, that if you have vastly excess numbers, for example, in certain parts of this country, there are problems with deer numbers, and that is having an impact on woodland and the very proper campaigns of the government in order to reforest the country, and therefore, but that of course involves, in many cases, having professional hunters doing this. Having people, for example, firing crossbows and animals lingering for several days. And Cecil the Lion was quoted, and that, of course, was the case that really caught the attention, the imagination of the British public. And that's what focused them on this, and made very clear that they did not want this to continue. He's absolutely right. But there is another factor to this, and this is an issue that's taking place, particularly, for example, with elephants. That the elephants that are being taken out are, of course, the really big, the leaders of the tribe. This, therefore, has a significant effect on the gene pool, and there already seems to be some evidence that elephants with smaller tusks are surviving, and therefore, in the world of natural selection, changes are taking place on the individual, on the actual individual appearance. But also, because although people, some of the hunters don't seem to accept this, animals live in social structure. Some, of course, are solitary, but many other animals live in social structures. You take out, and we saw this, for example, with the death of Cecil the Lion, but we also see this very much with elephants, where this completely disrupts the social structure and also the coherence and cohesion of herds of elephants. But this applies to other creatures as well. So both in terms of gene selection, but also in terms of the development and maintenance of the group species, this actually works to its detriment. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to our friend. I wholeheartedly support his bill, but the point he's just been making, it's in the title of the bill. What these people are after are trophies. And they are not going to select the weakest in the herd or weakest amongst the pride. They are going to go for the one that looks most magnificent on their wall or wherever they want to display it. And therefore they are taking out the strongest and weakening the gene pool and having exactly the opposite effect on conservation. And that's another reason why we need to send this strong message and support my honourable friend's bill.
Can I thank him for that contribution? And he's absolutely right. The impact on the species as a whole, the negative impact, has to be considered as well. Especially, as was mentioned previously by our colleague from Bristol, right on the honourable member for Bristol, because of the way in which we are seeing real reduction in some species, so we're getting below the critical mass necessary in order to sustain a species, to have the necessary genetic variation and maintain a healthy species as well. Can I just make a quick bit of progress, and then of course I will, because I mentioned one of the campaigning organisations, and if I take interventions before I mention the others, they might think I'm leaving them out. But I do want to pay tribute to the many campaigns that have been maintaining interest in this issue over the years, bringing us to the culmination, I hope, today. And those are particularly Humane Society International, Lion Aid, Four Paws, Born Free, all of whom have played a prominent role in contacting members and campaigning, but also the Coalition Against Trophy and Canned Hunting. And that's Action for Primates, ALAW, Animal Defenders International, Animal Aid, Animal Interfaith Alliance, Catholic Concern for Animals, the Conservatives, again showing the bipartisan nature of this, the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation, International Wildlife Bond, Labour Animal Welfare Society, One Kind, People for Nature and Peace, Protect African Lions, Quaker Concerns for Animals, the RSPCA, Voice for Lions, World Animal Protection, Wildlife Conservation Foundation, Zimbabwe Elephant Foundation. And if I've missed anybody out, they can text me, we might include it in the wind-up. But these have worked together very successfully to highlight this issue, and we pay tribute to them. I give way to the Honourable Member.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving me, and on that very point, I totally agree with them. I'm supporting this bill because I stand with many of my own Falkirk constituents who have written to me on this issue. And you mentioned many of the NGOs, so I've been heavily involved with Four Paws UK, who have provided so much useful information to me on this subject over a long while. As we all know, this is a non-partisan issue. MPs from all corners of the House have spoken at great length, passionately and totally on the incomprehensible nature of this brutal sport. So enough talking. The time is to make this actually happen. And does he agree with me that killing animals for sport is just not an acceptable practice?
Well, he makes that point very strongly and stresses once again the all-party support for this measure. And that was also clear in the. I will give way to the honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way and congratulate him on bringing this bill forward. I fully support it and I'll be voting for it today. He outlined a very impressive list of organisations there. I don't think anybody's quite mentioned that apparently 9 out of 10 of the British public also support this, and I think that's something that the House of Lords need to take note of. I've just been looking through the list of emails that I've had on this subject from right across my constituency, from Taunton, from Didsbury, from Burnage, from Wiggin, from all kinds of different demographic groups, from all different kinds of areas around the country. The British public are absolutely united in wanting this trade banned, aren't they? Yeah.
Can I thank him for that point and also for highlighting the level of support. Of course, that was reinforced by the government themselves in January in their response to the petition instigated by Mr. Peter Egan. And this was their response. The government made we will continue to deliver our manifesto commitment to ban the import of hunting trophies from endangered animals, which has overwhelming support from MPs and the public. We recognise, they said, that this is an issue that the public feel very strongly about, and over 85% of responses to our consultation supported further action. In the previous parliamentary session, the government fully supported the Hunting Trophies Bill during its passage through Parliament. The bill passed the House of Commons in March 2023 with strong support from MPs, did not progress through the committee stage in the Lords. We will continue working to deliver this important manifesto commitment. And I hope the Minister will be able to back that up further in her contribution later on this morning. And that was reinforced also in a letter to the to the Honourable Member for Crawley, who convened a letter from a number of members from across the House, where again the Minister at the end of January once again said that there is considerable debate. The government supported the bill. They share the disappointment that it didn't pass the Commons. It's absolutely clear that whatever our other divisions, we are united in support of this. Now, there is one particular aspect that I also want to mention and highlight, and we've talked a lot about hunting in a way in the wild, but there is also the even more deplorable business of so-called canned hunting, where especially where animals that are specially bred, especially lions, they're bred in an enclosure to be shot by depraved individuals who want a trophy. I pay particular tribute, again, someone with whom I might disagree on other issues, to Lord Ashcroft, who has spent a considerable amount of time campaigning, but also instigating research into this appalling trade, and I hope the bill will help to reduce its attraction. One firm involved in this dreadful trade advertised Your hunt is never complete until you receive your animals at home for you to reminisce and recall your experience for the rest of your life. Do we really want to be associated with people who take that sort of attitude? I've taken an amount of time and a number of interventions. We could go on a lot further in a lot more detail, but I recognise that the House will want to make progress, and I recognise that some colleagues will want to make what I hope will be brief contributions. Of course.
Is he going to take us through the clauses of this bill, and particularly refer to clause 4, which was incorporated in the bill as a result of the acceptance of one of my amendments when this bill was last debated? Clause 4, as it now stands, has not yet been explained, and I'm be interested to know whether the Right Honourable Gentleman supports it and how he sees it going to work in practice.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman, who in other contexts, as on the British-American Parliamentary Group, where we're joint officers, I consider a parliamentary friend. But I also thank him for highlighting the fact this bill was amended during its passage in order to take account of various views. It was carried without dissent in this House and forwarded down there. I thank him very much for highlighting that aspect, and that's why precisely it should be voted on again and sent back down to the other House in order to be incorporated into the laws of this land. Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Henry Smith.
Deputy Speaker, thank you very much for calling me early in this debate. It is a very great privilege to follow the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Warley, and I pay tribute to him and indeed so many other members across this House who have worked so hard, not only in supporting my bill when it was before this House last year, but also for their campaigning on the issue of ending the importation of the hunting trophies, the body parts of endangered species into this country. It has been a fantastic effort, and indeed enjoys the support that we've heard so far of well over 4/5 of the British public, and indeed it was a manifesto commitment that I stood on 4.5 years ago, and I understand has been reflected in the manifestos of many other parties represented in this House. Last March, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Hunting Trophies Import Prohibition Bill that I brought through passed this elected chamber unanimously. And, as we've heard from my right honourable friend, the member for Christchurch, we accepted compromise amendments to make sure that it was reflective of as many views as possible. When it went down to the other place, quite frankly, a very small minority of peers acted discourteously in the way that they sought to block this legislation. And that is why we have had to bring it back, and I'm grateful again to the Right Honourable Gentleman for doing so. I mentioned the widespread support for this legislation in this country, but it's also extremely popular in other parts of the world as well. Southern Africa has been mentioned. I was in a number of Southern African countries last year, where there was a clear desire, again I would say by a majority of people, to make sure that this legislation is enacted in this country and indeed, as the Right Honourable Gentleman has said, in other countries as well. Because it is not a natural practice of people in Southern Africa. This is a neo-colonial import that was brought to that continent during the time of colonisation and is not something that is native. Therefore, it is something that I think enjoys widespread support to the ending of this practice across the world. It's also, as the Right Honourable Gentleman said, not unique to Africa. There have been some claims that somehow this is some racist legislation. This is telling countries around the world how to act and how to conduct their own hunting policy. Let's just remind ourselves, this is a piece of import legislation. This legislation is saying that we in this country, by a clear majority, choose not to want to allow the importation of the body parts of endangered species slaughtered and killed by hunters into Great Britain. That is the territorial extent of this bill. That is what it is designed to do. Nevertheless, I think it would send a very strong signal that these practices are deeply damaging to conservation, as has eloquently been said by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Warley, in his opening remarks. The damage to the gene pool by taking out the most top animals in, say, a pride of lions or a herd of elephants, the big tuskers, is something that is beginning to damage their ability to be able to survive. Let's remind ourselves again what this legislation is about. This legislation isn't about banning hunting, although I might have a view on that. This legislation is about protecting endangered species before it is too late. I will be delighted to give way.
In his tour of Africa, did he have the opportunity to meet President Mzizi of Botswana, who has described Western interventions as a racist onslaught? He said, it's racism. They talk as if we are the grass the elephants eat. It startles me when people sit in the comfort of where they are and lecture us about the management of species they don't have.
Well, no, I haven't met the current president of Botswana, but I have met the previous president of Botswana, President Khama, on a number of occasions, and he is passionate about ending trophy hunting because it is not typical African communities who benefit from trophy hunting. It is the big industry that supports it that benefits from that, and therefore I think the Botswana example is a very good one, because in a country like Botswana there is a huge difference of opinion over whether trophy hunting should go ahead. Of course, I'd be delighted to give way.
I put in, Honourable Gentleman, I pay tribute to him for the work that he's done on this issue, but isn't the answer to his honourable friend that this bill is actually dealing with the UK and the import of trophies to the UK and says nothing about Botswana?
The Right Honourable Gentleman is absolutely correct. As I said earlier on, this is a piece of imports legislation with the territorial extent of Great Britain. It is what we choose to import into this country, and the clear majority of the British people do not want the body parts of endangered species to be imported into this country, because the majority of people care about those majestic species and they want to see them continuing to exist for their children and their grandchildren and many generations to come. The idea that killing an endangered species saves an endangered species is just absurd and should be called out for what it is. I would be delighted to give way.
I also, again, pay tribute to him for the work that he's done on this, and again, reiterate that the fact we're back here is rather absurd, because this House agreed unanimously to take this through. What I wanted to say, though, is that my constituents in Watford, which are very far away from many of the countries that this is happening, have absolute passion to end this practice. But as has been stated, this isn't about the practices in those countries. This is about what we import into our country. And if there's anything that we need to do, it's to make sure that we end this abhorrent act of importing what is effectively dead carcasses of endangered animals for people to stick on their walls.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Watford. He has been a stalwart in supporting me in this campaign. What he says is absolutely right. This is about, again, to remind ourselves what this piece of legislation does. This is about what we choose to import or not. into this country. And it extends to the importation of endangered species body parts hunted throughout the world. This would, as the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Warley, said, extend to a prohibition to bring in the trophies hunted from polar bears in Canada. We don't see people claiming that we're being racist against the Canadians because we choose not to want to import endangered polar bears. So we do need to remind ourselves what this legislation does. Madam Deputy Speaker, I could speak with passion on this principle for hours to come, but I'm conscious that what we have here is parliamentary procedure, and therefore I don't want to detain the passage of this bill any further, and I would call on honourable and right honourable members across this House to send a very clear message from this elected House once again that we in this country choose not to import the body parts of endangered species trophy hunted into Great Britain. Thank you.
Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. All of us here in this House are familiar with the term trophy hunting. We've come to recognise the evil acts that those two harmless-sounding words represent. But for those watching who may be less familiar, animal welfare organisations such as SPCA International define it as the hunting of animals for sport, not for food. Usually the animal is stuffed or a body part is kept for display. They go on to say, many hunters claim that trophy hunting isn't bad for animals. They say they're supporting animal conservation. The opposite is true. Live animals support the population of their species. The League Against Cruel Sports says, we believe this multi-million-pound industry is unjustifiable from an animal welfare point of view, but also for conservation, as it is responsible for endangering species around the world. And as for sport, that word is usually reserved for activities that revolve around the more positive aspects of life. Fitness, healthy competition, teamwork, friendship, personal achievement, endeavour and endurance. Not a single one of those can be attributed to an activity where an individual who chooses to photograph themselves grinning triumphantly, celebrating their killing of a once gentle and graceful giraffe, whose lifeless body now lies slumped and twisted at their feet, pumped full of deadly bullets. My good friend, the vet and animal welfare campaigner, Dr. Mark Abram, OBE, agrees. He says, anyone with an ounce of compassion and kindness despairs at seeing these images of cowardly, pathetic trophy hunters grinning over their still warm kill, exploited animals used as pathetic props to maintain, even elevate, an online self-image of superiority without any shred of guilt or conscience. He goes on to describe those taking part in these killings as having a tragic lack of empathy and the highest form of narcissism, and that to be complicit in this most extreme, callous form of animal cruelty, plus then to harvest the body parts and ship them back home to the UK, couldn't be a clearer indicator of violent antisocial behaviour. Every member of this House will have had emails, letters and meetings with constituents who love and value animals and who loathe those who exploit, harm or kill them. The kindness shown by so many British people who campaign on behalf of animal charities, who volunteer, who make donations or fundraise and who share a love for our planet, the incredible and breathtaking wildlife that we're so fortunate to benefit from. How dare a few wealthy individuals decide that they have the right to buy and cause the death of a lion, a polar bear or an elephant? Alongside our constituents, there are those who use their fame and public platforms to fight for the protection of animals. Those campaigners include frequent visitors to Parliament, whose passion is infectious. People like the wonderful Peter Egan, friend to many in this place, who for years has fought hard to raise awareness and keep a ban on trophy hunting imports at the top of MPs' agendas. Peter works with fantastic campaigner Eduardo Gonzalez, who we've talked about earlier, supported by many across this House, including the member for Crawley, who has never given up fighting to protect animals during his time here. As he steps down at the next general election, It is vital that we carry on his compassionate work, and that is something I absolutely pledge to do to the best of my ability. No speech about animal welfare should leave out top animal champion Ricky Gervais. He could spend his days polishing his many awards, but instead he chooses to condemn trophy hunting. It's a shame that those who consider the murder of animals a hobby. He supports the ban and has called it humanity at its very worst. The murder of animals for fun is also condemned by Chris Packham, Bill Bailey, Joanna Lumley, Sir Ranulph Fiennes, MPs and activists across the political divide, and those with no political affiliations whatsoever. The legendary Jane Goodall says, "Trophy hunting is utterly cruel, utterly unnecessary, and utterly disastrous from a conservation perspective. It inflicts pain and suffering on animals for no other reason than to boast of some ephemeral power. There is no, prowess, can't read my own writing. There's no material human need met by it. It's a hobby, pure and simple, and a deeply gory, and a deeply, I really can't read my writing, and a deeply wrong one at that. So I urge colleagues to support this private member's bill, sincerely thank the member for Warley for bringing it forward today, and echo the words of the Humane Society. There's no excuse for trophy hunting, so let's get the ban done.
Sir Bill Wiggin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And for me, the one thing that unites this House is that we all want to see conservation and to see it done successfully. But this bill has always been about racism and neo-colonialism. And this bill is questioned by science and by African countries. And if anybody, no matter how much you think you love animals, is thinking of writing or contacting me about trophy hunting, I insist that you consider seriously what African representatives have said about this bill and about people like yourselves. If we compare the last 22 years, 73 CITES-listed species of animal have been imported as hunting trophies. In the same period of time, the pet industry has traded in over 560 listed species. So if you care about CITES, then perhaps this bill should include pets as well. And I don't believe anybody in this House intends to be racist, but this bill crosses the line. The Namibian Environment Minister, Pohamba Shifeta, has written to our Environment Secretary denouncing the bill a regressive step towards neo-colonialism. Your bill implies that your judgments supersede our insights and expertise. Such unilateral actions made without consultation and collaboration with us challenges the sovereignty of nations like Namibia. We've talked about Botswana, and I'm going to quote what President Masasi says, but it's worth remembering that Botswana had 50,000 elephants. It now has 130,000 elephants. The population increases year on year by about 5,000 elephants. They issue trophy hunting licenses for 400, and those licenses have never all been taken up. So when he describes intervention in Africa's wildlife as a racist onslaught from the... I'm in the middle of the quote, but I think the President will forgive me for allowing him to intervene.
That this House is perfectly entitled to make decisions having considered all the facts, not selective facts, all the facts, and then decide that, whatever it is, it does not want to have hunting trophies brought into this country. Doesn't he agree with me? We're perfectly entitled to do that.
If I didn't respect the House, I wouldn't have bothered turning up today. So I don't think that's a valid point. I think the bit that we mustn't do, and we must consider how we would feel if Botswana or Namibia or Tanzania or Zambia or South Africa or Zimbabwe were legislating on what we do here. Because awkwardly, for the Honourable Gentleman, we're not banning trophy hunting in the UK, we're targeting CITES-listed species. And we don't seem to care that that can be up to 5,000 of them, of which only a handful are actually relevant. So if I can continue, this is a regressive step towards neocolonialism, whether he means it to be or not. Your bill implies that your judgments supersede our insights, the people who actually look after these animals, and such unilateral actions made without consultation challenges the sovereignty. This is a racist onslaught for people who sit in the comfort of where they are and lecture us about the management of species they don't have. And he wasn't just speaking for himself. Last November, The Times, The Telegraph and the Daily Mail reported that ordinary Africans share his view. The paper quoted from a survey of 4,000 people in Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania, Zambia and Zimbabwe who said the UK legislation was racist and neo-colonial. That's what they're saying about us, so whilst I respect the sovereignty of the House, I wouldn't like it if they said things like that about us, and I'm astonished that he does, so I'll give way to him.
The Times, which I don't read very often, the Honourable Member said they rightly, i.e. the African community leaders he's referred to, and conservationists, they rightly argue that it's not for us in the West to decide how they should manage their wildlife, and that is why I cannot endorse this. But I'm not telling them or demanding how they manage their wildlife. What I'm saying, and I think many members in this House are saying, we don't want those disgusting trophies in this country. Simple.
The African countries find it appalling that British politicians show no concern for African lives threatened by these animals. They are furious with the virtue signalling proposals which lack scientific credibility. And again and again and again they return with the facts, and they are completely ignored by honourable members in this debate. I will come on to what Oxford University said about his facts and figures. This week, Botswana's Minister for Environment and Tourism, along with the High Commissioners of Namibia, South Africa, Zambia and Botswana, came to this House to represent their dissatisfaction with the bill. This is significantly different, Madam Deputy Speaker, from when my honourable friend, the member for Crawley, brought the bill forward. There was no pushback from African countries then. Now we're seeing significant unhappiness from these countries about this bill. DEFRA ministers and their Labour shadows know that the High Commissioners of these 6 African nations have jointly condemned this bill as inexcusable meddling in Africa's democratic affairs. There are, in the UK, tens of thousands of trophy hunt animals, which the bill doesn't cover. And if the UK hates trophy hunting, it should ban it here first. I don't particularly want to see that, but that is what people in Africa feel. When the bill for the proposed ban was read a second time last year, the Minister told the Commons that its purpose was to reduce the impossible pressure on Africa's wildlife. Other MPs argued that the measure would save thousands of animals from the barbaric and savage African practice of legal hunting. Indeed, the Honourable Member for Canterbury used other such adjectives. But this is misleading. In fact, 70% of MPs' statements from the second reading of this bill were analysed in an Oxford University study and were deemed to be factually incorrect. This is a 6,000 species bill, and most of those are not threatened by trophy hunting. Since the year 2000, the UK has imported around 1% of the species in this bill. In 24 years, at least 20 of the species that the UK imports may be or are benefiting from trophy hunting. Rural Africa welcomes controlled legal hunting. It helps manage excessive herds and rogue animals. And the fees that hunters pay also bring significant cash into remote areas where tourists and photo safaris cannot get to. This income creates incentives for villagers to refrain from poisoning, snaring or shooting the animals. 20 to 100% of concession fees usually go towards community land. Africans know that legal hunting reduces illegal hunting, and it's the poaching, often funded by Chinese criminal gangs, that provide the critical risk of survival to the species that we all treasure. And these brutal gangs are indiscriminate in how many animals they kill. By contrast, legal hunting estates need and want to grow their herds to ensure the future of their businesses. And that is why they invest heavily in anti-poaching patrols. They provide the armed guards which are vital to protect these animals from gruesome deaths. This legal hunting operates under strict quotas agreed by national governments and the international regulator. And as a result, the herds have flourished. One paper found that in Kenya, where hunting has long been banned, there has been a dramatic fall in wildlife numbers. Another study found that Botswana, which did ban hunting, saw a horrific surge in the human-wildlife conflict, with a 593% increase in elephant carcasses being discovered. And that disaster led to the ban being quickly reversed. In 2016, briefings from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, states that legal, well-regulated trophy hunting programs can and do play an important role in delivering benefits to both wildlife conservation and for the livelihoods and well-being of indigenous and local communities. In a letter to the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Namibia's Minister for Environment and Tourism said, "We are most concerned about how this proposed law would undermine the finances of our protected areas and conservancies. The lack of dedicated land and the protection which hunting pays for would critically undermine the survival of species which we all love." He went on to say the implications of this legislation, therefore, extend far beyond what has become known as trophy hunting, potentially impacting the livelihoods of rural communities that rely on the revenue it generates. A joint statement from Southern African government representatives in the UK opposed the current bill, saying, "Yes, I'd be delighted."
I think he indicates that only 1% of these trophies came to this country. Well, if it's only 1% and we enact this piece of legislation, it's not going to make that much difference then, is it, to those countries?
It made enough difference for him to turn up and for me, and it made enough difference for all these representatives of countries who care about the creatures we all purport to care about to say that this bill is wrong. In fact, they said, if income streams from trophy hunting were substantially reduced, as would be the outcome from this bill, land would be abandoned and subject to poaching, or converted to less biodiversity-friendly uses, such as agriculture and livestock production. Local communities live near and with wildlife would suffer. I think it's pretty clear that they don't think he's right. The statement ends, Southern Africa's track record on conservation is world-leading, and we use trophy hunting to do it. Let us continue to do so. And I recognise that that is very awkward for members opposite who care about animals, but the people who are responsible for those animals are telling us that we are wrong. Botswana is the top country in the world for large animals. Namibia is second, Tanzania is third, and all three countries have paid hunting to finance protected space and armed guards for these animals. And the country which is 123rd in the world, that's us, are, in the words of David Attenborough, one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. We got rid of the last brown bear 1,000 years ago, and our last wolves 264 years ago. Africa's human population has also risen 8-fold during our lifetimes, causing immense pressure on the land available for wildlife. This means that Africans are increasingly coming into conflict with big animals, which may eat their goats, threaten their children, or trample their villages. Botswana's Minister for Environment and Tourism started an article published in the Daily Mail last year with, "Last month I attended the funeral of 2 villagers in my homeland. Both of them were teenagers tragically killed by charging wild buffalo as they travelled to school and work. And sadly, this is not an isolated incident." She went on to say, "Believe me, I do understand the horror people feel when they see a trophy of when they see a photograph of a trophy hunting person posing beside a recent kill. Lion killings in particular seem to cause outrage amongst Britons, especially after the notorious shooting of Cecil the lion by the American trophy hunter in Zimbabwe in 2015. The picture, widely circulated, of Walter Palmer standing over Cecil's body became emblematic of man's destructive relationship with nature. Reasonable though this reaction is, it is knee-jerk. It fails to acknowledge that for many Africans, trophy hunting is vital for the local population. It is a wildlife conservation measure that generates income used to combat illegal poaching, supporting community development and enhancing habitat protection. Sadly, we all too often focus solely on animal welfare and possibly at the expense of human life in Africa. I have thought carefully about the amendment I intend to submit for this bill. The bill does not need to keep coming back in the way the Honourable Member for Warley has brought it back. My amendment will ensure that the bill protects certain species whilst recognising that other countries are better at managing conservation, perhaps even than we are. It will allow the Secretary of State to add or withdraw countries from a list of countries which issue hunting licences and shows sufficient levels of concern for conservation. Any hunting trophy obtained under licence in a country that is on the list would be exempt from the ban. Kenya would not be on the list as it does not allow hunting and its wildlife numbers sadly have declined, but countries that do and that were doing a good job should be allowed to continue. This bill is questioned by science, it is questioned by African countries, and there is no excuse for blundering into an inadvertent racism. And I ask the House that if we want Africa's big animals to survive into the future, do not ignore the science and the misinformation which endangers the animals that we care the most about.
Yeah.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's an honour to follow the Honourable Member for North Herefordshire, but I can't say that I agree with a single word that he said. He quoted David Attenborough, and David Attenborough describes trophy hunting as incredulous and certainly doesn't support it. I pay tribute to my right honourable friend, Member for Warley, for bringing this forward, the previous work of the Honourable Member for Crawley, and also to our departed friend Bob Blizzard, who did an enormous amount of work on this issue when he was a member. And the reason I just wanted to make a short contribution to this debate is because I had the privilege of actually going on a safari when my wife and I visited Africa, and it was the trip of a lifetime, and if I ever get the chance to get back and do that again, I don't think it would be the same trip, because the first time experience of seeing these magnificent beasts in their own habitat is something you never forget, and I would try to impress that on those people who seek to the thrill, I suppose, is what they're looking for, of murdering these beasts. We arrived at our camp, and within 2 hours we were in a truck and taken out to look at the wildlife, and within that 2 hours I was sitting in a truck with open sides, and a lion just walked past the bottom of the truck. I could literally look down and see the back of the lion as it walked past me. And I sat there and thought for a minute, what am I doing here? Because there is literally no cage around you. But you trust entirely this stranger that you've just met, who is the guide that takes you around. And here you are with this wild beast only a couple of metres away from you, just walking calmly past the truck. To get up close and see those animals in that and experience that is something never to be forgot. And the most memorable experience was when we were on the side of the Chope River in Botswana, and a herd of elephants were just feeding at dusk, grumbling to one another, talking to one another as they ate the reeds on the side of the river. And we got up quite close to them, felt these huge beasts quite close, and felt entirely safe, and you felt that you had a privileged position being so close to them in their natural habitat and experiencing them in that way. The idea that anyone would go into that environment with a gun and slaughter those animals is beyond me. If you want to experience the wildlife, Don't go murdering it. Go up close to it and experience it. And if you just imagine for a minute, the truck that we were in had probably about a dozen people in it. If every one of us had a gun and went out slaughtering the animals, you know, the effect on the species right across, you know, would be enormous. So the numbers of us that go with armed with cameras rather than guns on the economies of those countries is enormous. You can't compare it. And the arguments that we've heard today about being racist towards African countries, it's not just about African countries. I'm not anyone saying we're being racist to Canadians by not wanting polar bears to be imported. I mean, as in the words of David Attenborough, this is incredulous. I'm going to give way once because I don't want to take up too much time.
The Canadian government haven't written to object. It's the African countries that object to this, and I hope that was clear from what I said earlier.
I'm sure it is, but it's also a very tiny bit of their economy that the hunting fraternity contribute to. But what we seem to have heard today is an argument that without the enormous wealth of the people who go trophy hunting, that conservation can't be afforded. And I just don't accept that is a reasonable argument. And of course, you know, fees can be paid by people like me. I would pay an enormous fee for the privilege of going to see these animals in their own habitat and leave behind that fee in order to pay for conservation. So there are ways that we can contribute to conservation, which way it would outpay the money that the honourable members opposite have been talking about. And just to finish, I mean, let's be honest about this. The majority of the people that talked this out in the House of Lords, in the other place, were hereditary peers. That's the truth of it. The enormously privileged, wealthy, it's calling this idea that it has enormous support from all of the people. Of course, because it has the support of the people, it has to be socialist, doesn't it? I mean, it has to be socialist because commoners want it. And how can we possibly see the Conservative Party supporting such a measure that is so socialist in its fundamental objectives? I mean, this is complete nonsense. But there is a species that perhaps metaphorically, I'll illustrate metaphorically, that we should be hunting to extinction. And that is the position of the hereditary peers in the ability to vote on our laws in our country. That is an outdated anathema that has to come to an end. And the person who starts that hunt will have my full backing.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's a pity that the honourable gentleman, in a debate which should be about facts, has allowed his prejudices to come to the fore, because I don't think that helps his cause. Indeed, my honourable friend and I agreed that actually this shows that we are winning the argument today, because the honourable gentleman, some of his colleagues, are having to resort to smearing members who are in the other place. And they put forward perfectly reasonable amendments, and the problem was that they ran out of time for discussion. And that bill, as it was, had been amended in this place, and the only reason it was amended in this place, Madam Deputy Speaker, was because my honourable friend and I tabled a large number of amendments which put pressure upon the promoter of the bill and on the government to accept some of those amendments. And one of those amendments was to add something to the bill, which is now clause 4 of the bill, and one of the amendments was to remove something from the bill, which was a Henry VIII clause allowing the subject matter to which this bill would apply to be extended by statutory instrument without any proper consultation. So the bill is a better bill than the bill which was first introduced into this place by my honourable friend for Crawley, but the bill is still very defective, And certainly I think it would be a much better bill if the amendments suggested by my honourable friend in his excellent speech were to be incorporated within the text. I can happily give way if need be, but sorry, I thought...
I'm sorry, I was a little slow to intervene at that point. My right honourable friend is making an excellent speech, as always, and the purpose of these amendments is to ensure that we take any risk of racism away from this legislation, because at the end of the day, we are united in wanting better conservation.
My honourable friend, that is what unites us, and the disagreements across the House are on the means to the end. Everybody wants to have better conservation of endangered species and wildlife in Africa, and I, like the honourable gentleman from Eltham, I've had the privilege of going and seeing safari in Africa, in South Africa indeed, on two separate occasions. One was in, I think, about 1984, and it was pretty hard to find in the game reserves the wild animals for which we were looking. But when I went about 18 months ago again, Madam Deputy Speaker, there was an abundance of rhinos, giraffes, elephants, lions, leopards, and so on. And we had some most amazing experiences, and where we stayed, people were using their cameras, but they were also relying upon the protection provided by the excellent team who were looking after and conserving that area of essentially a safari park or a game reserve. But when we were there, Madam Deputy Speaker, we could see with our own eyes what was happening with people who were coming in trying to poach the animals which had been looked after. And the cost of measures against poachers is incredibly high. And how is that cost going to be funded unless it's going to be paid for by the people who are actually engaged in the conservation? And one small means by which they do raise funds is through allowing the collection of trophies. And they allow people to collect these trophies, and I think almost all of them that are not kept in Africa are imported into the United States or into Spain or into Germany. Very few are brought into this country. And so I think this came out in an earlier discussion. Whatever else happens, whatever happens to this bill, this trophy hunting is going to continue, but it may not involve the import of a small number of trophies into this country under a licensing and regulatory regime which has stood the test of time. So instead of having regulation of imports, we're going to have an outright ban on imports. And why are we going to do that? When you look at the impact assessment, not for this current bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, but the impact assessment which was produced in 2021 in respect of an earlier bill, and the answer, this is produced by the government, why is government intervention necessary? It will address public concerns about imports of hunting trophies from endangered species. So essentially, the government is admitting in its own impact assessment that this is about presentation, about virtue signalling, about pandering to public opinion, whether or not that public opinion is sound. So let's take ourselves back to the time, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the government took the view and Parliament took the view that we should abolish capital punishment. At that time, a vast majority of the population took the view that we should keep capital punishment. If we'd applied the principles which are being applied in relation to this bill then, we would still have capital punishment because it would address, and I quote, public concerns about the issue of people being murdered. And we in this House need to rely upon science and fact rather than allowing prejudices and ignorance to prevail. And that's one of the reasons why I do hope that this bill will be able to be improved if indeed it receives a second reading today. Can I also, Madam Deputy Speaker, refer to another point in this impact assessment? Because paragraph 4, or I think section 4 of the impact assessment, at page 21 in paragraphs 98 onwards, refers to the costs of this proposed legislation. And I think that's the point that my honourable friend and I are seeking to get across to the government. It says, in 2019, a letter from 130 researchers described how in African countries that practice trophy hunting, more land has been conserved under trophy hunting than under national parks, with hunting areas contributing to landscape connectivity. Some argue that restricting the import and export of trophies from hunting risks land conversion and biodiversity loss, and other alternative area management strategies must be in place to promote conservation, protect endangered species, and support livelihoods. Furthermore, many questions remain on whether alternatives such as wildlife tourism can effectively replace trophy hunting, especially in areas with poor political and economic stability and areas with less aesthetic appeal. That is not what I'm saying, that is what the government said in considering the costs of this legislation when it was doing its impact assessment. And then it goes on to say that wildlife conflict with local people can impose serious costs, including causing physical harm and death, damaging crops, predating livestock, and competing with livestock for food. Where wildlife provides few benefits to local people and or imposes substantial costs, animals are often killed for food, trade, or to remove problem animals. And that's a recognition, a welcome recognition by the government of some of the realities surrounding this subject, rather than relating solely to the prejudices of people who have been ill-informed by certain organisations. The government also concedes, and I quote at paragraph 100, evidence suggests that trophy hunting can provide a value for animals which incentivises their protection for the purposes of hunting rather than indiscriminate removal, e.g. land use change to agriculture. Without trophy hunting, an income stream linked to positive conservation outcomes could be lost, and other options need to be in place to address this conflict. That's what the government was saying in its impact assessment. And so I hope we're going to hear from the Minister when she winds up this debate how the government is going to address those concerns which it recognised in its impact assessment, if indeed it is still hell-bent on promoting and pushing this legislation through to try and get it onto the statute book. And then the government also conceded, and perhaps this is the point my honourable friend could also refer to, the government also conceded in its impact assessment that a ban in the legal movement of animal trophies could have the unintended consequences, including the illegal trade in wildlife parts, which is unregulated. It could also reduce the amount of protein available to local communities, as meat is often a byproduct of trophy hunts. After a hunting ban in 2014 in Botswana, one village lost the provision of 154 tonnes of meat, so less protein was available to the community. This resulted in an increase in illegal poaching and documented declines in wildlife. So those are facts, Madam Deputy Speaker. What is the government's response to those facts to which it referred in its own impact assessment in 2021? And then the final issue of costs under paragraph 102, one of the major arguments for hunting for trophies is that it provides financial benefits to local communities, and without trophy hunting, these benefits could be lost. However, the extent to which local communities truly benefit is the subject of debate. And of course that's the debate we're having today, Madam Deputy Speaker. So let us not take a view that all those people who are supporting of this bill are lovers of animals and all those people who are against it despise animals. Nobody could be a stronger supporter of animals than I am, and indeed my wife and I are proud that we have produced a daughter who is now a veterinary surgeon. Can one adduce any more evidence of the importance of being inculcating one's children a love of animals which their parents share? So let's have none of this nonsense about suggesting that this is a vile activity and those people who are against this bill are subject to some sort of vilification. That is completely ridiculous. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I also refer to the letter to which my honourable friend referred as well, from the Namibian Association of CBNRM support organisations. This is a letter which was sent to all British MPs, and I'm disappointed that there aren't more of my parliamentary colleagues here who will have seen this letter, and what have they done as a result of the points made in this letter? One asks rhetorically. Mr. Louis says, please do not regard Africans as being incapable of deciding our domestic policies. The reason we have legal hunting is that it pays for protected land for our big animals. As our human population grows, it is crucial for our lions and elephants to have such space. Our rhinos also require armed guards to safeguard them from ruthless poaching gangs financed by Chinese criminals. When there are no guards, massive numbers of the animals get killed by these brutal gangs. Legal hunting pays for the guards and kills far fewer. And when we, as a family, were in South Africa, we saw the consequences of what happens with rhinos, because in order to try and disincentivise the illegal poaching of rhinos, the rhinos are dehorned. But such is the value of rhino horn now, Madam Deputy Speaker, because of ill-conceived bans on use of rhino horn, even from dead animals, that rhinos are now being poached just for that part of the horn which is no longer visible, which is a part of an extension of the head. And that, again, is a consequence, an unintended consequence, obviously, an unintended consequence of restrictions on the ability of countries where they have got, when they are not able to export the rhino, the horn, from dead animals. And so this is why it is a very nuanced debate, and I'm not sure that we are getting as close to it today as I think their lordships were when they were debating it at report stage in their house. And this very important letter from Maxie Louis goes on to say, the evidence for this is in the peer-reviewed science, which shows how successful Africa's system is at defending our precious animals. People who have read this science and back legal hunting, including the EU Commission, I'm not sure that that's his strongest argument, and George Monbiot, I think that is a stronger argument. So does the global regulator of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. We use legal hunting to manage our big animals because they are a mortal risk to us and our children. African lives are at stake. You do not have any dangerous wild animals. Britain got rid of its last brown bears 1,000 years ago, and its last wolves 264 years ago. So what he says in conclusion is wildlife in Africa is flourishing because of our management. We ask for no more virtue signalling. It's arrogant, ignorant and racist. And I couldn't have put it better myself, Madam Deputy Speaker. And that's why I'm very disappointed that the government continues to be pandering to those people who would fit into the description given by Maxie Louis. And can I now turn to the amendment which was passed in the bill which was presented in the last session by my honourable friend for Crawley? Because the right honourable gentleman, in introducing the bill today, didn't refer to that except to say that this was now in the legislation, and it showed how we had passed a bill to the other place, which, as a result of a consensus. That's one interpretation of what happened on that Friday when we were debating report stage amendments. Essentially what happened, as you may recall, Madam Deputy Speaker, was that there were a large number of amendments, and a deal was done whereby some of those amendments were accepted, two in particular. All the other ones were rejected. But one of those amendments, the new clause setting up an advisory board on hunting trophies, is now in this new bill. And I'd like to just speak briefly to that and the importance of it and the background to it. Because who is going to decide on these issues relating to hunting trophies? And that's why I think we should have expertise rather than people who are prejudiced. And that's why clause 4.1 requires that the Secretary of State must appoint an advisory board on hunting trophies, to be known as the advisory board. The advisory board appointed under that subsection must have up to 3 members, and the role of the advisory board is to advise the Secretary of State on any question relating to this Act which the Secretary of State may refer to the committee, on any other matter relating to the import to Great Britain of hunting trophies derived from species of animals which appear to the Secretary of State to be or to be likely to become endangered. And that, I think, is an improvement on the original bill, because it would require the Secretary of State to take some advice instead of just listening to the mob, so to speak. I'm pleased that this is actually still in the bill. And clause 4.4 says, in appointing members of the advisory board, the Secretary of State must have regard to their expertise in matters relating to the import of hunting trophies. But one thing which we did discuss in the previous bill, and which I don't think we have really discussed today, is the extent of this bill, because this bill extends to England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. But the prohibition on imports only applies to imports into Great Britain. And why is that? And why does the Right Honourable Gentleman, in limiting this bill to imports into Great Britain, think that that is going to help meet his objective? And doesn't it really show that we are no longer one nation of the United Kingdom, but there's going to be a different regime in Northern Ireland compared with that which prevails in the rest of our country? And I hope that perhaps the Minister will be able to explain in her speech why this bill, if the government is in favour of this, and it is the government which purports to be a government for the whole of the United Kingdom rather than just Great Britain, why the government is only purporting to restrict the import of hunting trophies into Great Britain and not into Northern Ireland. And maybe that's got something to do with the fact that there's an open border between Northern Ireland and Ireland itself, and that Ireland is in the European Union, and the European Union has a much more benevolent approach to the issue of the import of hunting trophies than it seems that this government has. But I think that that's an important issue which needs to be addressed in this legislation, and I hope that when if the bill gets into committee, that we can ensure that the bill the provisions of the bill apply equally to all parts of the United Kingdom. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's no need to speak at great length on something like this when the arguments against the bill are so strong. But can I just say that I don't think we should vilify the people who engage in conservation measures in the way that some people have been seeking to do. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. If you look at Kenya compared with other countries in southern Africa, Kenya, as a result of their well-intended bans, that has been totally counterproductive, whereas in southern Africa we are seeing tremendous progress in conservation of endangered species. And just thinking about, slightly lateral to this, but I was thinking, is the collection of rare butterflies, endangered butterfly species, illegal in this country? And the answer is no, it is not, except with very, very few exceptions. So if we are free to pin butterflies to the wall and put them into display cabinets, does it really suit us that we should be preaching to people in Africa as to what they can do in terms of their conservation measures? I think not. And then we talk about the importance of culling, and culling is essential if you're going to control the number of species in, for example, in a restricted area in a wildlife park. We engage in culling in this country, particularly now of deer culling, and part of that culling can include using for people with rifles to shoot some of the deer which they think have got the finest antlers, and then those deer are then kept, or the antlers are kept as trophies. That's not my line of business at all, but I respect other people may like to do that. But it's all part of the process of culling in order to ensure that we don't have too many deer to be managed within our country. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a complex bill, and it is worthy of further detailed consideration. But can I also say that I'm worried that the government may have a secret agenda, which is essentially to try and use the Parliament Acts in respect of this legislation. And I'd be grateful if my honourable friend the Minister can assure me that under no circumstances would the government seek to override the Parliament of this United Kingdom by seeking to use the Parliament Acts on a bill which was rejected in the other House not because it was voted down, but because there was a lack of time given for it. And I'm not sure that there's any precedent where the Parliament Acts have been used in circumstances where the debate in the other place has been curtailed through lack of time, and then when the bill is brought back in the next session, then that failure to provide time by the government is then used as a justification for using the Parliament Acts. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could respond to that point as well when she winds up this debate. But finally, can I put on record, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I am against this bill having a second reading in its present form, and hope to have the opportunity to vote in that way later.
Yeah. Shadow Minister Ruth Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very pleased to be able to be speaking in this important bill today. ending the importation into the UK of trophies produced during the barbaric sport of trophy hunting, is something that should have happened a long time ago. And I thank my friend, the Right Honourable Member for Warley, for bringing this bill forward today, following on from the Honourable Member for Crawley's earlier bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to get this sorted today because we're running out of, Warley, Crawley. I'm not sure there's another constituency that actually rhymes with this, but I'm sure we can work on it. I also thank the animal welfare charities nationwide, including Four Paws, Humane Society International, World Animal Protection and Banned Trophy Hunting, who've been working tirelessly for years to pass this legislation and who've produced a most helpful briefing note for this debate today. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the former President of Botswana, Ian Khama, who's been a tireless and passionate campaigner on these issues too. But for all the praise our campaigners are due, Madam Deputy Speaker, we shouldn't have needed to be here debating this bill today. This is a piece of legislation that should have been passed by this government long ago. We all know that members of the public, including in my own constituency of Newport West, overwhelmingly support this bill. The wide public support that exists in favour of this legislation is reflected in the fact that banning hunting trophies was both the 2019 Conservative Party manifesto promise, as the Honourable Member for Crawley said earlier, as well as the Labour manifesto promise. So why is this promise by the government not already in law? Why has the government failed to bring forward its own bill banning trophy hunting as it pledged to voters that it would? And given an earlier private member's bill seeking to implement a ban progressed through the House last year, why are we here again debating an equivalent bill? The reason, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the private member's bill we debated last year was deliberately and wholly undemocratically derailed by a small number of mostly hereditary Conservative peers in the other place, as the Honourable Member for Eltham pointed out earlier. These peers ignored the will of the public, the welfare of animals and their own party's manifesto commitment by using the amendment process as a blocking device. On this side of the House, we think that's unacceptable, and the Labour Party wants to see this long-promised and long-overdue legislation progressed as soon as possible. I will.
That when the bill reached the House of Lords, no peer stepped forward to sponsor it. Why didn't a Labour peer do that?
I thank my honourable the honourable member opposite for pointing that out. And obviously there were issues that were going on within the House, the other place, which I was not party to at the time, so I'm sorry I can't comment on his comments there. But these... I will.
She keeps referring disparagingly to hereditary peers, but isn't it correct that of all the peers in the other place, a significant proportion of hereditary peers have themselves been elected to that House, unlike most of the other ones who are appointees?
I thank the honourable member for that. He talks about me keeping referring to. In fact, I've referred to it once, and that was in response to the gentleman behind me. So, you know, I do... Of course I will.
I find it fascinating that not only do members opposite want to defend this sort of completely outdated and barbaric practice of trophy hunting, but they also want to defend the procedure by which a few hereditary peers elect amongst themselves, with not a member of the public having any say in the matter. Could I also help my honourable friend by saying, of course, in the last session of Parliament, the bill here was introduced by a Conservative member of Parliament. Indeed, there was a Conservative member of the House of Lords who was going to take up that bill. Someone else shot in and grabbed it beforehand with a bit of sleight of hand. If he wants to defend that sort of jiggery-pokery, he's welcome to.
Order, and I'm just quite anxious that we come back to the bill as opposed to what might be a later bill in the House, which is about hereditary peers. Ruth Jones.
I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for clarifying that. But I do thank the member behind me for clarifying the situation that happened there, and I will move on. Because this bill will prohibit the bringing into Great Britain hunting trophies from the species listed in Annex A, being the most endangered species, or Annex B, being species threatened by commercial trade, of the Principal Wildlife Trade Regulation. These lists largely correspond to the equivalent list in the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES, an important international agreement protecting endangered plants and animals that the UK is a party to. The bill also creates an advisory board on hunting trophies, as the honourable members opposite highlighted earlier, which will advise the Secretary of State on any issues relating to the legislation or any matter relating to the import to Great Britain of hunting trophies derived from species which are or are likely to become endangered. I cannot emphasise how crucial this legislation is. Trophy hunting is not only barbaric, it is wholly unnecessary. In this country, as in most countries, we have long recognised that animals should not be subjected to unnecessary suffering. This principle is reflected domestically in our Animal Welfare Act 2006 and aligns with our understanding supported by animal welfare science and also enshrined in legislation. Animals are sentient beings. As sentient beings, animals deserve to be treated with dignity and humanity. But there's nothing dignified or humane about the sport of trophy hunting. It involves killing innocent animals for the sole purpose of turning their bodies into trophies. These animals often experience immense pain, fear and distress in the moments before they die. Some may be shot by inexperienced hunters using less efficient weapons like crossbows or spears, which do not deliver rapid death. And we saw this with Cecil the lion in 2015, who suffered for several hours following his wounding by crossbow in a beautiful part of southern Africa before he was finally put out of his misery. His death, quite rightly, caused outrage around the world, including right here in Britain. Other practices that hunting trophy can involve raise further welfare concerns, and I was horrified to learn of the practice of canned hunting, or the captive wildlife farming of animals for hunting. This practice often involves inflicting extremely poor welfare conditions on the captive wild animals, mostly lions, who may have to suffer from unsatisfactory enclosures, a lack of enrichment and insufficient provision of shelter and vet treatment, all so that part of their body may eventually become somebody's trophy. And let's not forget the negative impact that trophy hunting can have on other animals as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, such as the harm to offspring who may be unable to survive on their own after their parent is left for dead. And this was highlighted again earlier, and also the weakening of the gene pool, again highlighted earlier. These are important factors to consider. Trophy hunting can also have a negative impact on wildlife. Trophy hunters tend to target some of the world's most iconic animals, including endangered wild animal species such as lions, polar bears, giraffes and rhinos. These hunters selfishly kill these vulnerable animals so they can display their body parts as some sort of perverse pride. World Animal Protection notes that British hunters have brought home approximately 25,000 hunting trophies since the 1980s, and approximately 5,000 of these came from species which were at risk of extinction. The public are right to find this absolutely abhorrent and want to increase the protection afforded to these species who are already under pressure from habitat loss, climate change, poaching and illegal wildlife trade by passing this important legislation. And the Honourable Member for Canterbury outlined so eloquently earlier on these issues. Because let's not forget, Madam Deputy Speaker, how unnecessary these horrors really are. Compared with overall revenue that local economies gain from tourism, income from trophy hunting income is so insignificant. A 2017 report by The Economist at Large analysing 8 African countries found that while overall tourism was between 2.8 and 5.1% of GDP in the 8 studied countries, the total economic contribution of trophy hunters was at most about 0.03% of GDP, in stark contrast to the claims made by the honourable members opposite. We also know that there are more ethical and sustainable alternatives to trophy hunting for conservation. And I note a recent study which showed that 84% of previous or potential tourists, including those visiting from within Africa to South Africa, would be willing to pay a daily lion protection fee for wildlife conservation. Similarly, photographic safaris, which, as the Born Free Foundation puts it, involves shooting an animal with a camera rather than a gun, is another welfare-friendly alternative to hunting trophies. These alternative activities have the potential to generate income equalling or even exceeding the income currently generated from trophy hunting, without causing pain and suffering to wild animals. as the Honourable Member for Eltham highlighted in his amazing experience he had on his photographic safari. The idea that this country should be supporting efforts globally to promote humane tourism is also consistent with recent legislation passed in this House, the Animals Low Welfare Activities Abroad Act 2023. However, I note that the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs is yet to even consult on the activity regulations which are necessary in order for this legislation to have any impact, or to give any indication as to when such consultation will begin. And I would encourage him to do so as a matter of urgency, because wild animals deserve protection, and this requires regulatory action. But as with so many animal welfare issues, this Conservative government is letting animals and the public down by failing to act. Because, as a Shadow Secretary of State, my friend from Croydon North pointed out last Friday, when another private member's bill containing a broken Conservative Party promise was before this House, there is a rather extraordinary number of animal welfare pledges made by this government which have been completely abandoned. The government likes to tell the public that it has progressed world-leading animal welfare commitments, but Compassion in Rural Farming ranked the UK only 9th out of European countries by the percentage of cage-free farm animals, trailing Luxembourg, Austria, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, Slovenia, Denmark and Belgium. So, of course, while our government has announced support for the private member's bill on animal welfare issues that were put forward by its backbencher MPs after the government abandoned the Kept Animals Bill, this is not leadership, and I would gently say to the Minister, if the government really cared about animals and if it really wished to honour the enormous public interest in passing strong laws for animals, it will be putting forward its own promised measures itself. So until it does so, we on this side will keep reminding this government of its broken promises, and we'll keep putting forward private members' bill like this one today, which we hope will become law as soon as possible. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have seen in the House here today a near unanimous show of support. This is not racist colonial legislation. This is UK law governing what comes into the UK. That is our right, and this bill seeks to exercise this. So let's get on with it and let's get it done. Thank you.
Minister Rebecca.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, there are very many on both sides of the House who have been eagerly awaiting the passing of this piece of legislation, and also many outside campaigners who've worked tirelessly on this issue, and many of our constituents. I've had many emails myself in Taunton Deane on this. So I want to thank the Honourable Member from Waverley for introducing this bill, and Warley, apologies, for introducing this bill, and all those who have taken part, but not least, of course, my honourable friend from Crawley, who did such a sterling job just 1 year ago. We had a lively debate then, I think he will agree, and we've had another similarly lively debate today. And so I wanted to just list some of the colleagues who have spoken so eloquently on both sides. We've had the honourable member from East Worthing and Shoreham on his photography issue, which was such a well-made point about taking photographs of these wonderful creatures. Chipping Barnet, Watford. We have also had Suffolk Coastal. So input from all those on interventions, but also some really moving speeches, particularly from my honourable friend from Crawley, and we've had many opposition speakers, of course, joining in as well. It's clear, obviously, still that the hunting trophy idea continues to divide opinion. We've actually witnessed some of that today from our honourable friends from Christchurch and North Herefordshire. There's disagreement over the scientific, social, economic, moral, ethical rationale for trophy hunting, and that will no doubt continue for some time. And there are those who point to the evidence about the potential benefits of well-managed hunting. We did hear a great deal about that from my honourable friend from North Herefordshire. But we've also heard on the other side of the evidence of harm on poor practice. But what I really wanted to stress today is the critical thing is we are actually facing a triple planetary crisis. We have biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution, and those are the greatest threats that we are facing globally. And as the Nature Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is in my inbox every day, and I am only too aware of the threats on all those things and how we need to tackle them. and about 1 million animal and plant species are facing extinction. Many of those things have occurred in really recent time, in our lifetime, and the abundance and the diversity and connectivity of species is declining faster than at any time in human history, and this includes species targeted for trophy hunting. And we all know, and we all love them: elephants, rhinos, lions, leopards, polar bears, just to name a small handful. And there are those who argue that banning the import of trophies from these animals won't do anything to improve their conservation status, and I'm certainly listening to my honourable friends, but the question we've got to ask ourselves is whether the import into Great Britain of trophies from endangered animals helps tackle biodiversity loss. Does this trade really help secure a sustainable future for species on the brink of extinction? And many animals are under terrible threat anyway because their habitats are shrinking, and that's for a range of reasons, social, economic, but certainly climate change is all part of that. And ultimately, the aim of this bill is to ensure that imports of hunting trophies to Great Britain are not putting additional pressure on already threatened species. That is what should concentrate our minds. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am pleased to confirm that Government will be supporting this bill, and in doing so we will signal our continued determination to fulfil our manifesto commitment in this regard. And I've heard arguments that the ban will have implications for local communities and conservation efforts globally, and that is definitely something that we've got to consider very carefully, and we must be alive to the unintended consequences. However, this bill is about imports to Great Britain. Many have referred to that earlier in the debate. My right honourable friend from Suffolk Coastal reminded us of that. And this is about listening to the British public. There is clear, strong and consistent messaging that we need to bring an end to the import of endangered animals taken for the purpose of hunting trophies. And indeed, the winds of change are blowing us in this direction. A number of countries have already put these restrictions in place. So it is, I'm actually not going to take any interventions because so many interventions were taken already, and we do not want to restrict the ULEZ bill. I will refer to some of these points he has rightly raised, though, in just a moment. It's obviously important then to recognise that the import ban, it won't prevent a UK resident or citizen from participating in hunting whilst they are overseas. Trophy hunting can and will continue around the world, and it's right that each country should be able to decide how best to manage its own wildlife. This bill does not change that, and this was actually highlighted by my honourable friend from North Herefordshire and my honourable friend from Christchurch, vociferously, but we're not preventing that. So I think that has to be remembered. And there have actually been regular opportunities for any countries all around the world, on both sides of this debate, to discuss this whole issue and raise their points. And indeed, we've had letters from the President of Botswana and Namibia, which actually the High Commissioner was written to just yesterday. So it's really important that we keep in mind the contribution to the UK trade in hunting trophy makes. Annual imports of hunting trophies in the UK are very few in number. It's on average 73 per year over the last 10 years. But even so, it is essential that we do our part to ensure that communities around the world can properly benefit from conserving the wildlife that they live alongside. And this was reflected during agreement on our hugely important global biodiversity framework. And there's now very strong and essential focus on how we as a global community finance biodiversity conservation and restoration work. And I know that members in this House know just how much this government is doing on that front with our huge £93 million Darwin initiative and our £30 million Darwin Plus initiative. And all of that focuses on biodiversity and conservation, but working with locals and Indigenous peoples. So penultimately, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm just going to turn to the bill and just run through some of what it contains. The bill will ban the import of hunting trophies for specific species with the explicit aim of ensuring that imports to Great Britain are not placing unnecessary pressure on species that are already at risk. For these species, an import ban without exemptions will be the most effective, providing clarity and addressing conservation concerns arising from trophy hunting. Clauses 1 and 2 of the bill together make provision for the import ban. It will cover trophies brought into Great Britain from animals hunted after this legislation comes into force. There are strict, clear lines about anything that's happened before that. And the definition of a hunting trophy in Clause 1 is the body of an animal or a readily recognisable part or derivative of an animal that is obtained through hunting for the hunter's personal use. This is how hunting trophies are defined in our current controls under CITES. Clause 2 applies the import ban to all species listed in Annex A and B of the Wildlife Trade Regulations. The Wildlife Trade Regulations implement the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or CITES, in Great Britain, and Annexes A and B are broadly equivalent to Appendix 1 and 2 of that convention and include species that the global community have agreed to protect through trade restrictions due to their conservation status. They cover a great number of species threatened by international trade, such as big cats, all bears, all primates, hippos, rhinos and elephants. And as a result, the bill will end the permit system for imports of hunting trophies from these species. There will be no provisions for exemptions to the import ban. Clause 3 is about movements from Northern Ireland. It really clearly states that the import ban would not apply in relation to the removal of qualifying Northern Ireland goods from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. Clause 4, which was raised by the Honourable Member from Christchurch, establishes an advisory board on hunting trophies. The role of the advisory board is to advise on any questions relating to the Act referred to by the Secretary of State. And Clause 5 simply covers extent, application, commencement and short title. So, in summary, just very quickly on the impact assessment, as I didn't allow any inventions. We heard some views about that impact assessment and what the government was going to do about that. But actually, there are two sides to that as well. The impact assessment did present both sides of the debate, but it also highlighted that trophy hunting can lead to population declines, and overhunting threatens over 30% of endangered mammal species, according to IUCN. It also noted trophy hunting quotas are reliant on rather inappropriate, unscientific or excessive quotas and over-reliance on opinions. And management is also based on poor quality data. Similarly, a report by the University of Oxford found damaging effects of unsustainable trophy hunting can extend beyond hunting areas. So I hope that's answered some of the questions, Madam Deputy Speaker. This has been a very positive and lively debate on both sides of the House. I'd like to thank my honourable friend for bringing this back to this House and reconfirm that the Government is fully committed to supporting the bill.
With the leave of the House, in that case I will not be calling John Spellar to wind up, but we'll move straight to the question. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. Division, clear the lobby. question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no.
No.
Tell us for the ayes, Mark Fletcher and Mike Wood. Tell us for the noes, Sir Bill Wiggin and Sir Christopher Chope. lock the doors. Investigate what the delay is in the lobby, please. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 49. The noes to the left, 0.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 49. The noes to the left, 0. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlocked. We now come to the second bill of the day.